In the last few months, if you're even remotely into politics, you probably heard about the infamous Project 2025. And now that election season is in full swing, you're most likely going to hear about it even more. But what you probably haven't heard is what Project 2025 truly is, and what all would happen if it actually came to fruition. So in this video, we're going to take a deep dive to answer those questions, including who created it, the history behind it, what exactly is in it, and how it all connects to Donald Trump. Let's get rolling. In the simplest terms, Project 2025 is an extensive political action plan that goes into great detail about how Donald Trump and his allies can seize absolute control of the US government should he end up winning the 2024 presidential election. It plans on doing this by consolidating power to the executive branch of government through what is known as the Unitary executive theory. It was cooked up by the Heritage Foundation back in 2023, and honestly, to say its impact would be massive would be an understatement. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all, it's important that we start at the beginning and talk about who and what the Heritage Foundation is. The Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank that has had significant impact in U.S. politics since its founding in 1973. If you're not sure what a think tank is, it's basically just a research institute that's made up of experts in a particular field who want to use their knowledge to influence the government. This particular think tank was established during the Nixon era, but it really didn't hit its stride until the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was elected. To give you an idea of why Heritage was created in the first place, its founders Paul Weyrich, Edwin Fuellner, and Joseph Coors believed that Richard Nixon was too liberal. Yep, you heard that right. These guys were so reactionary that even Richard Nixon was too liberal for them. To be honest, multiple videos could easily be made for these guys alone, but we'll save that for another time. Basically, these founders became disillusioned by the Nixon presidency when he ended up signing legislation like the Clean Air Act, the EPA, and OSHA into law. They felt that these policies didn't directly benefit the wealthy enough, so in retaliation, they decided to create a Christian conservative alternative to the Brookings Institute, another think tank that focuses on economics, foreign policy, governance, and global development. When January of 1981 rolled around, the Heritage Foundation published its first report detailing how it planned to shrink the federal government. They titled it The Mandate for Leadership. It contained more than 2,000 proposals on how the president could use the federal government to advance conservatism, and was widely accepted by the Reagan administration as a result. In fact, it was so beloved by Reagan himself that he called Heritage a vital force and gave copies of the mandate to each of his cabinet members. He even appointed several of its authors to his administration. Consequently, the Heritage Foundation became a massively influential organization in U.S. politics for decades to come. You could say the Mandate for Leadership ended up being the primordial soup that birthed Project 2025 40 years later. That brings us to Donald Trump. By the time he took the Oval Office in 2017, Heritage had built up enough clout in U.S. politics that they basically became the only outside organization that had any actual say in Trump's stat picks. This resulted in 66 associates from the foundation being selected for his administration, and led to almost 64% of the mandate's proposals being implemented in his first year alone. When he ended up losing re-election to Joe Biden in 2020, Heritage immediately reached out to 3 people in Trump's former administration and hired them directly. Now, in 2024, the year of our Lord, Project 2025 and his partners employ over 200 former Trump officials. So when Trump claims that he has no idea who is behind Project 2025, he is lying. Now let's get into the key people involved in the project and what it actually aims to do. The short answer is a lot. The official policy plan is a whopping 887 pages long and was written by hundreds of people, most of which were former Trump administration officials. In fact, the main person linking Donald Trump to Project 2025 is a man named John McEntee, a former Trump staff member who currently serves as a senior advisor to the project. The only thing worse than stumbling across his cringe TikTok videos is being a teenage girl who happens to stumble across them. McEntee began his career working for Trump back in 2017 as a personal assistant, but he was let go in 2018 by the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly after failing a security clearance. Why did he fail, you ask? Well, the Department of Homeland Security was actively investigating him for gambling issues, so it was deemed as a major liability. Cue the infamous Trump quote saying that he only surrounds himself with the best and most serious people. After getting canned, Trump personally reached out and rehired McEntee in February 2020 as director of the White House Presidential Personnel Office, despite him having absolutely zero experience in personnel management. His primary duty in this role was to identify and remove the bureaucratic appointees of the federal government that he felt weren't loyal enough to Trump. This would lay the foundation for a key component of Project 2025 that we'll get into later. For now, let's talk about Kevin Roberts, the current Heritage Foundation president who officially established Project 2025. This is a man who openly admitted that the organization's primary role in the current day is to institutionalize Trumpism. He believes that Trump got a slow start during his presidency and wants to use Heritage and its allies to make sure that that doesn't happen again through any means necessary. To prove this point, back in July, he went on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast and said live in 4K.
The reason that so many anchors on MSNBC, for example, are losing their minds daily is because our side is winning. And so I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
In case you need help translating that, the head of the most influential conservative think tank dropped the mask and is openly claiming that he wants a civil war. And as the late, great Maya Angelou once said, when people show you who they are, believe them. Now that we've covered a few key people who are behind the scenes, let's get into what Project 2025 actually aims to do. The first pillar of the project is the newest edition of the Mandate for Leadership report that Heritage puts out every presidential election. While this version is almost 900 pages long, it has 4 stated objectives: to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life, to dismantle the administrative state, to defend the nation's sovereignty and borders, and to secure individuals' God-given rights to live freely. Some people might glance these over and think it doesn't all sound so bad on the surface, but if you've had any experience with conservative rhetoric, you know that almost everything here is a dog whistle that's been designed to hide what the authors truly mean. Case in point, when it comes to the Declaration of Independence, Kevin Roberts most likely has an entirely different interpretation of what the pursuit of happiness means than you do. While most Americans would say it means everyone has the right to live a substantial life and chase after whatever makes them happy, Roberts believes it actually means an individual must be free to live as his Creator ordained. He has openly stated that the Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. Now, I don't know about you, but not being able to do the things you want in life that make you happy because of someone else's religious deity doesn't sound like freedom to me. In fact, it sounds like the opposite. He has also said he believes that the key to a good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, religious devotion, and spirituality. So if your idea of a happy life doesn't involve being religious or having a traditional family, Project 2025's plan is to force you into that lifestyle regardless. So far, we're only one pillar in and we're already getting a taste of what the true foundation of this entire project is: Christian nationalism. That brings me to the next important person to discuss: Russell Vought. Vought is a self-described Christian nationalist who worked in the Trump administration as deputy and director of the Office of Management and Budget. These days, he runs the Center for Renewing America, a pro-Trump think tank he founded that basically just exists to facilitate a second Trump presidency. Back in February, an internal memo leaked that revealed Christian nationalism was one of the CRA's top priorities if Trump manages to get reelected. But what is Christian nationalism exactly? To quote Encyclopedia Britannica, it's an ideology that seeks to create or maintain a legal fusion of Christian religion with the nation's character. Advocates of it consider their view of Christianity to be an integral part of their country's identity and want their government to promote or even enforce the religion's position in it. In a nutshell, it's basically just the Christian version of Sharia law. While the exact features of Christian nationalism vary from country to country, the United States version would almost certainly be very authoritarian while masquerading as freedom. Project 2025 is a perfect illustration of that. People like Kevin Roberts and Russell Vought want to wield the power of the federal government to do things like imbue Christian fundamentalism into every aspect of the government, essentially undermining the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. They also want to make getting an abortion as difficult as possible, thus getting rid of people's reproductive freedoms and bodily autonomy. They also would like to bring the hammer down on virtually every minority group in existence, especially the LGBTQ community, therefore ridding consenting adults' freedoms to love who they love and simply just exist. Christian nationalism has never been about freedom. It's always been about power and control. It's a threat to our country that's been growing like a tumor since the 1930s, and now with Project 2025 and Donald Trump at the helm, it finally has the blueprint and vessel it needs to accomplish its goals. The first goal of Project 2025 is to deliver as much power as possible to Trump through what is known as the Unitary executive theory. This theory is a controversial interpretation of constitutional law that was originally championed by James Madison back in 1789. It involves putting the entire executive branch under the president's direct authority instead of keeping the checks and balances we have in place for it today. For example, before any of the president's cabinet picks can be ushered into office, the Senate has to confirm them first by voting. But with Project 2025's extreme interpretation of the theory, this will no longer be the case, and Trump will be able to hire and fire them whenever he sees fit. This would effectively politicize every executive branch agency by taking away their ability to act independently of pressure from the president. This will result in Trump being able to wield agencies like the FBI to go after political opponents or anyone he deems insufficiently loyal, no matter the knowledge and experience they have in their field. Speaking of knowledge, public education is a major target of Project 2025. Just like the arguments conservatives made for slavery during the Civil War, Heritage wants to leave it up to the states by drastically reducing the amount of input the federal government has. It plans on doing this by completely eliminating the Department of Education, something Republicans have been trying to accomplish since the 1980s. What's interesting about this mission of theirs, though, is that education in the US is already highly decentralized. As it stands, the federal government has no say in determining the standards or curricula of schools. Hence why many of our public schools are so terrible, especially in the red states. So then what could it be that Project 2025 is actually trying to accomplish here? Well, if you look at the Department of Education's overview and mission statement, you'll see that one key role they fill is fighting discrimination by ensuring that everyone has equal access to an education. And there you have it. The real reason they want to get rid of the Department of Education is to get rid of the federal government's ability to enforce civil rights laws so that they could chip away at the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Every day, conservatives prove that they really only want to conserve one thing in this country: discrimination. To hammer this point home even more, the Project 2025 document pertaining to the Department of Education states, federal overreach has pushed many school leaders to prioritize pursuit of racial parity in school discipline indicators, such as detentions, suspensions, and expulsions, over student safety. Student safety, you say? Strong words coming from the party that offers nothing but thoughts and prayers after every school shooting. Speaking of getting shot, let's talk about Project 2025's plans for your healthcare. First off, if you're a veteran, get ready for the lines at the VA to get even worse because it's planning on cutting funding to the Department of Veterans Affairs while simultaneously forcing it to see more patients each day. If you're elderly or disabled, your monthly prescriptions are about to get way more expensive because Heritage wants to take away Medicare's ability to negotiate drug prices for you. This is because they ultimately want you to sign up for a Medicare Advantage plan instead of using Part A or Part B, essentially guaranteeing that no matter how hard you worked in your life, you'll still be paying out of pocket every month and contributing to some private insurance company's bottom line. Medicaid isn't safe either. The project contains a ton of ideas on how to cut its funding from every angle. These include making it harder to qualify for the program, limiting the benefits you'll receive should you qualify, and capping the federal funding the program receives. If you have children, then measles, mumps, and rubella are back on the kids menu because public health agencies won't be able to require vaccinations in children after Trump takes power. If you don't have children, or you don't want them, then access to contraception and abortion is about to get virtually non-existent. At the time of this video, the Department of Health and Human Services classifies abortion as healthcare, so naturally Project 2025 is aiming to reverse that. Not only that, they also want to surveil and straight up prosecute anyone who has had or seeks to have an abortion. Roger Severino, the Heritage Foundation's Vice President of Domestic Policy, plans on using the HHS to make every state report exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. They also plan to utilize the Comstock Act, a law passed back in 1872 that cracks down on the shipping of obscene materials, to federally prosecute anyone who transports and receives contraception and abortion medications like mifepristone. The end goal here is to effectively turn anyone with the uterus into a broodmare. As a matter of fact, in 2023, J.D. Vance, Trump's couch-loving VP pick, signed a letter to the Department of Justice, urging them to use the act to ban the mailing of all abortion medication nationwide now that Roe is overturned. Handmaid's Tale, anyone? To almost no one's surprise, immigration is in the crosshairs as well. And just like with abortion, they want to wield the power of the federal government to crack down on it like never before. Their plan is to bypass Congress and the immigration courts in order to take a wrecking ball to our existing system. Not only would this absolutely devastate our economy, it would skyrocket the price of almost everything at the grocery store. Currently, immigrants make up about 73% of all farm workers across the US. So if you think the price of milk and eggs is bad now, just wait until 3/4 of the entire agricultural labor force is gone. Speaking of paying more, well, when it comes to taxes, not being rich is about to get a lot more expensive. In typical Republican fashion, Project 2025 aims to reduce the tax burden of the wealthy by shifting it to the lower and the middle classes. It will do this by reducing the corporate tax rate to 18%, the capital gains tax rate to 15%, and getting rid of our current tax bracket system that allows lower income households to pay less. Instead, it plans on imposing two flat tax rates, 15% on incomes below $168,600 and 30% on incomes above that. They also plan on eliminating most deductions, credits, and exclusions in the process, so if you're anything but wealthy, you're about to have an even tougher time paying your bills. When it comes to the LGBTQIA community, being out of the closet will essentially mean being in constant danger. Not only is the mandate filled with dehumanizing language in regards to LGBT people, it's also filled with proposals that would strip them of their human rights and freedoms. It does this under the guise of opposing DEI and what it calls radical gender ideology. So if you're gay and you want to get married, it makes it illegal again. If you're gay and want to adopt kids, it wants to make that illegal too. If you're young and trans, it plans on making sure your parents know about it. Everything laid out here is designed to oppress you for not being a part of what it refers to as a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. Project 2025 also has big beef with journalists. Not only does it want to reconsider how the White House should host the press corps, Chapter 8 of the mandate calls to stop funding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting altogether. This would basically defund PBS and NPR as a result. Mike Gonzalez, the author of this section, claims the government is spending billions of dollars on leftist opinion because they've released stories unfavorable to Republicans over the years. But multiple independent media bias rating companies have determined both outlets to have a high credibility rating despite his feelings about them. Sorry, Mike, but as one of your cohorts loves to say, facts don't care about your feelings, bud. Speaking of feelings, Kevin Roberts has a lot of them about pornography. In the foreword to the mandate, he wrote the following: "Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered." From this, we can pretty easily deduce that the next thing on their agenda would be a federal ban on pornography. But what does Roberts consider to be pornography exactly? The project doesn't clearly define it, so let's read more of what he wrote to try and find out. Look at America under the ruling and cultural elite today. Inflation is ravaging family budgets, drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. From this sentence alone, we can see exactly what Kevin thinks pornography is: trans rights, drag queens, and library books. Just like every other thinly veiled euphemism of his I've broken down in this video, this one is no different. He wants to use the excuse of cracking down on pornography to go after the LGBT community because to these weirdos it's all the same. The overgrown amygdala in the conservative brain causes them so much existential fear that they can't distinguish between two completely separate, unrelated topics. Speaking of existential fear, climate change is another area the project has in its deranged sights. Not only do they want to torpedo the executive orders Biden signed regarding climate, they also want to eradicate climate change references from absolutely everywhere. This would go as far as restricting the U.S. Armed Forces from even taking climate change into consideration when evaluating national security threats. Now, if you pass 7th grade science, then you learn what the greenhouse effect is and how carbon dioxide is the #1 cause of anthropogenic climate change. Well, in true death cult fashion, Project 2025 seeks to override the EPA's conclusion that carbon dioxide is bad for human health and nullify the emission regulations that keep corporations like Chevron and ExxonMobil from spewing CO2 into the atmosphere completely unfettered. It also wants to shrink the Environmental Protection Agency and completely dissolve the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. For those of you unaware, the EPA has been one of the few guardrails we have against fossil fuel companies since it was founded over 50 years ago, and the NOAA tracks weather and climate in real time so that it can keep us informed. In fact, the National Weather Service actually exists under the NOAA, so eliminating it will get rid of the Weather Service as well. Nothing says owning the libs quite like kneecapping America's farmers, sea captains, and air traffic controllers. Heritage's goal with what would be left of the EPA is to staff it with appointees based on their loyalty to the president instead of their scientific expertise, which actually leads us to Pillar 2. So, in order to get any of the policy proposals we just talked about passed, the federal government will need to be absolutely stacked with loyalists who will do whatever the president tells them. This is where Pillar 2 comes into play. It aims to replace as many civil servants as Trump feels necessary in order to make these policies happen. Just like with the unified executive theory we covered earlier, the goal here is to fill government positions with workers who will ask how high whenever the president says jump. To give you some background, the United States currently employs about 2.2 million workers who perform what is basically every function of government. This is referred to as the civil service. These jobs include everything from being a postal worker to working for the NSA. The people who fill these positions are there based on their qualifications and expertise. As a result, they can do their jobs without having to worry about political retribution, allowing them to serve the general public as opposed to whoever is in office at the time. Project 2025, of course, wants that to change. In order to make this change, Heritage is creating a LinkedIn-style database of true believers to pull from. The people who apply will be screened based on the responses they give to different questions that were specifically designed to vet their loyalty to Donald Trump. Then, if Trump manages to get reelected and takes the Oval Office again, he will immediately reinstate what is known as Schedule F, allowing him to start replacing civil servants at his will. If you've never heard of Schedule F, it's an executive order signed by Trump back in 2020 that would have allowed thousands of civil servants to be replaced at the president's whim. Instead of hiring and firing workers based on whether they can actually do their jobs, these positions would be up for grabs to anyone who sucks up to the president enough. At this point, it probably wouldn't surprise you to learn that Schedule F was devised by the Heritage Foundation's own James Shirk, who just so happened to serve in the Trump administration as one of his special assistants. And now that Trump has another shot at the presidency, Project 2025 plans to revive this directive so that the federal government is filled with nothing but yes men who will do the bidding of Trump instead of the people. Once all the lackeys have been selected, it'll be time to groom them to be good little minions for the president. That's where Pillar 3 kicks in. The goal of this one is to train the appointees on how to do their jobs as bootlickingly as possible using the Presidential Administration Academy. This academy is a collection of online videos and in-person seminars that was designed to teach new recruits exactly how to use their positions to do Trump's bidding. Remember, the goal here isn't competency, it's loyalty. Back in August, ProPublica published a few of these training videos, and they are wild. They leaked over 14 hours of footage that make up 23 videos in total. One of them is an almost hour-long discussion dedicated to how conservatives believe the left speaks. And it probably won't surprise you that most of the speakers in these videos are former Trump staff members. In one of them, Dan Huff, a former Trump legal advisor, outright said, "If the next Republican president does not execute a dramatic course correction, there may never be another chance." So if you're not on board with helping implement a dramatic course correction because you're afraid it'll damage your future employment prospects, it'll harm you socially, look, I get it. That's a real danger. It's a real thing. But please, do us all a favor and sit this one out. I think that says it all, honestly. The fourth and final pillar of Project 2025 is what they call the 180-day Playbook. It outlines a set of tasks Trump needs to complete within the first 180 days of his presidency to ensure all of the policy goals can be accomplished. Heritage has managed to keep the exact details of this pillar hidden from the public so far, but what is known is that it consists of multiple pre-drafted executive orders that are ready to go the minute Trump walks into the Oval Office. While we may not know everything in the playbook, some Heritage members have let things slip. For instance, our old friend Russell Vought, during an interview with undercover journalists, stated that the president, quote, has the ability to, both along the border and elsewhere, to maintain law and order with the military, unquote. This infers that they plan on giving Trump the authorization to use the Insurrection Act against immigrants and citizens alike. Because of slips like these, this playbook has been called the most radical, extreme, and dangerous parts of Project 2025. In the immortal words of Coach Walls, the key thing to remember here is that when somebody takes the time to draw up a playbook, they're going to use it. In conclusion, despite the mountain of evidence proving otherwise, Donald Trump and his campaign officials have attempted to publicly distance themselves from Project 2025 by claiming he knows nothing about it and that Agenda 47 is the true policy plan of a second Trump term. Behind the scenes, though, Trump regularly meets with the Heritage Foundation about their ideas for his next term, and they have both acknowledged that Project 2025 aligns very well with Agenda 47. In fact, at a Heritage Foundation event back in 2022, Trump gave a speech saying, "This is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do, and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America." Russell Vought, one of the authors of the project we covered extensively earlier, has said on record that Trump attempting to distance himself from Project 2025 was nothing more than graduate level politics. What's even funnier is that Caroline Leavitt, Trump's own press secretary for his campaign, has repeatedly tried to say they have nothing to do with Project 2025, despite her starring in one of the leaked training videos. Wow. It's almost like these people are all lying, unprincipled charlatans who should be kept as far away from the reins of power as humanly possible.